Hey guys, welcome back. Hope everyone's feeling well today. So we're going to go now from the last unit we just talked about was Unit 10. We're going to move into Unit 6 now. Unit 6 is going to be in two parts, and Unit 6 is going to cover our immune system or host factors. So today we're going to do a little bit of the first part of the unit. We're going to look at our innate immunity. So let's get started. All right, so in the broad scheme of things, immunity means free of burdens. So it means you don't have any more worries, hopefully. I don't think many of us are in that situation right now, but here we are. When we're talking about from a health and a medicinal point of view, immunity means free from disease. So our immune system is the part of our body that keeps us immune from disease, or helps us fight disease or infection. Now, the outcome of an infection is depending on what type of infection you're facing and how efficient that infection is at causing disease. Ideally, the outcome would be you would be cured and you'd have very little damage. In Unit 2, if you can remember, we talked about virulence factors. We talked about that related to how a bacterial cell can basically cause an infection. So we talked about how the bacteria can cause infection. Now we want to talk about how we can defend ourselves against those bacteria as they cause, as they try and cause infection. Now, our host factors, or our immune system, is going to depend on a few things. So how we fight infection, how we fight developing disease, will depend on these four things right here, basically. Our general health and nutrition. Are we generally healthy to start out with? The presence of normal microbiota, our immune status, and this would basically relate to if we've been exposed to this virus or bacteria before. Have we been vaccinated against this? So have we taken steps to protect ourselves against this current threat? And basically our immune response, how our body responds to this foreign invader. Now, again, I'm not going to show videos during these presentations, but definitely check them out when you're going through your notes. Okay, now our immune system is going to be broken down into a couple of different sections. Let me get my pen ready. So in the broad category, we're talking about our defensive mechanisms, how our body prevents us from being sick. Then from there we can drop down into passive and active mechanisms. Our passive mechanisms are going to be things that our body have anyways, and they're generally going to protect us from an infection that's trying to invade. So we break this down into our first, second, and third line of defense. The first one is the most general, the most basic. The second one is a little bit more involved, and the third one is highly specific and very, very efficient at what it does. So if we start off on the first line of defense, basically what we're talking about at this level is barriers. And what a barrier is going to do is it's going to prevent something from getting into our body. So if you think about a big fence around your yard, that prevents stuff from getting into your yard. It's the same thing for us. Our first line of defense is going to be our skin. All right, that's our contact with the outside environment. As long as our skin is intact, it's going to prevent a lot of things from entering our bodies. So that helps us immensely. The second thing we have there is mucous membranes. Of course, there's going to be secretions and all that there, and those membranes help keep things out that shouldn't be in there. Now, after we get past that, we're going to move into the active mechanisms part. And our active mechanisms we divide into non-specific innate immunity, and I'll talk more about innate in a minute. And then we have specific acquired immunity, and we'll talk about that as we keep going through the unit as well. So our innate immunity, our second line of defense, it's going to comprise of these four different things: inflammation, fever, our complement proteins, and our natural killer cells. These are all things that everybody has to prevent infection. Okay, these are the things that you're born with. If we move to the specific or the acquired or adaptive immunity, so it's 3 names for this system. Now we're talking about 2 different systems. We have our humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. This is what we're going to talk about in the second half of this unit. And for this unit right here we're talking about today, we're going to cover these 2 right here. Okay, so this is another table summarizing what was on the last slide. Again, we've got our first, second, and third line of defenses. The first line, intact skin, mucous membranes, and normal microbiota. The second line, we've got our natural killer cells, inflammation, fever, and antimicrobial substances. Those are the complement proteins we talked about. And in our third line, we have specialized T cells and B cells, and we have antibodies. So like I said before, this section right here is going to be in the second half of the unit, and this section right here is what we're going to talk about in the first half of the unit and talk about for the rest of today's class. Okay, so what's the difference between innate and acquired immunity? Okay, if we look at these graphs here, on the x-axis we've got time, so how long it takes for our immune systems to work. It's probably important if I just draw a line right down the middle here, okay? So this is going to be 1 instance, and this is going to be, this one over here is going to be 1 instance, and this will over here be the second one. So on the y-axis we're seeing our total immune response. So how does our whole immune system work based on exposure to a pathogen? So over here we've got hours and we've got days. This is the first time that we've ever been exposed to this microbe. So within hours, the first thing that will start to happen is we get a response from our innate immune system. So this is, maybe it's going to be inflammation, maybe it's going to be fever, but it starts just shortly after you've been introduced to a pathogen. It doesn't take very long to start at all. And you can see this will go on for a few days, and then after a while, after a few days, we'll have our adaptive immunity start to kick in, and they'll start to help with the fight for this infection. So this is the first time we've ever been exposed to this particular pathogen. So this is fine. We get better after a few days, and we feel better, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. Anyways, say a month later, you're in the hallway and somebody coughs and you breathe in the same microbe that we breathed in back here. So this is now the second time we've been exposed to this. Again, the first immune system that's going to kick in is our innate immune system. So that's going to be, like I said before, inflammation or fever, and that'll happen for a few days. But look, it won't be as long as the first exposure. It'll be quite a bit shorter this time. And the second thing is, when our adaptive immune system kicks in, you can see it has a much stronger response than it did the first time. So generally what will happen is the first time we're exposed to a microbe, it takes a while for us to adapt to it, a while for us to fight it off. The second time we're exposed to it, our immune system response is so much stronger because of the adaptive part that a lot of times we don't even feel sick. You may feel a little bit weak, you may feel a little bit feverish for a day, but then it goes away. It certainly won't be anything like we had the first time. If you want to consider this, now that we're in the age when we're talking about COVID, this is a brand new virus, of course, that's only been on this planet since late November or December. Nobody on the planet has adaptive immunity at first when COVID first came out. So when we had our immune response, this orange part of the graph doesn't exist. So you can see how long it would take for us to get better just with our innate immune system. So this is why COVID is such a threat or such a risk to us right now. Okay, now another difference between innate and adaptive defense is the type of cells that participate. So in our innate immune response, you can see it's in this, what do I call this, a pale greenish color. This circle right here is going to be the cells that are involved in our innate immune response. So we've got macrophages, natural killer cells, dendritic cells, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils. We also have T cells and natural killer T cells. Now these two cells are really, really important because these two cells overlap with the cells that work in our adaptive immune response. So these two cells are how these different immune responses communicate. So T cells and natural killer T cells are super, super important in making this connection. When we start talking about our adaptive immunity, now we're talking about B cells that produce antibodies, and then T cells that produce different types of T cells and as well memory cells. So the link right here, these two cells, natural killer T cells and the T cells, they're super important in linking these two types of our immune system together. All right. This table is really quite important. I'm not going to go through everything with you on this video, but have a look through here and make sure you're familiar with how these two are related and how they work together and how they're also different. So there's a lot of information on this. I realize that, and read through it, have a review, and if you're not sure about anything, you can always ask me some questions. So just to make it a little bit clearer, on this side right here, we're going to have, this is our innate responses, and over here is our adaptive. All right, so like I said, go through this and make sure you're familiar with it. Okay, so I've used the word innate immunity quite a bit already in this presentation, but I haven't really defined it for you yet, so we'll do that right now. What innate means is that you are born with these specific things. So an innate immune response is something that happens as soon as you're born. If you become exposed to a pathogen, a brand new baby will be able to do these things. Of course, they're going to have skin, they're going to have mucous membranes, so those are our first line of defenses. And then they're also going to be equipped with phagocytes, those natural killer cells, the ability to have an inflammatory response. They're going to have antimicrobial proteins or the complement system, and they're also going to be able to have a fever. So these things right here are our first and second line of defenses, and our first and second line of defenses are innate, which means you are born with it. So anybody that from their first breath will have this for their immune system. Okay, it's the adaptive immunity that comes along as you grow up, as you mature, and as you encounter different things as you go through life. So for the innate immunity, it's not specific. Okay, if you have a fever, your body doesn't know you're reacting to E. coli or COVID-19. You just know that there's a pathogen in your body, and your body for some reason your body can't function correctly, so we have a fever. We start a fever, and hopefully to prevent further infection. The innate immune system is not adaptive. That means it can't change. It means if you get a fever in November because you've been exposed to a pathogen, if you get exposed to the same pathogen the next time or a different one, you're going to have the same type of fever. Fever is not going to get any higher or any lower. It'll just be a fever response, or it'll be an inflammation response. So it's got no adaptive principles whatsoever. And it also has no memory. Okay, it can't remember what pathogen infected you the first time, the second time, the third time. It just has the same response over and over and over again. And those are the properties of our innate immune system.